Okay, we're moving on to Aristotle. We're going out of historical order. Nietzsche obviously died in 1900. Aristotle was writing in the 4th century BC. So we're going backwards in time, but we're going to shift from the question that we were pursuing with Nietzsche, namely, what's the foundation of ethical values and what's the origin of them, and is there any such thing as ethical values, and perhaps there is no such thing as ethical values. And we saw where relativism led, where atheism and subsequently relativism and consequently relativism lead, namely to something like nihilism. And we saw what Nietzsche was saying in terms of explaining the ethical landscape in terms of power and his hermeneutics of suspicion, looking to unearth the power schemes behind ethics. With Aristotle, something very different. With Aristotle, we're moving now toward the idea that there is something like the good and that it's discoverable. But right off the bat, Aristotle says in section 3 of chapter 1 that ethics is a kind of science. That is, it's a scientia or scientia. It means it's a kind of knowledge, but it's not an empirical knowledge. It's not an empirical science. On the other hand, it's not just what anybody thinks. It's not just off the top of your head. He certainly doesn't think it's reducible to power. And he thinks you can speak intelligibly about how a human being should behave. And we have to lay out his whole argument for that. But he actually thinks that there are certain things that are good for us and certain things that are bad for us. Objectively, much like you could say something about diet. It's not just a matter of opinion what's good for you physically. Right? We know protein and low carbs, low fat, whatever. There's certain things like healthy foods and certain things like unhealthy foods. And the same thing for Aristotle when he considers our mind or our soul, our psyche or psyche in Greek. There are good things we can do for it. There are good choices and good behaviors, and there are bad. If you want to think of it in terms of there are healthy and unhealthy choices we can make, and unhealthy or healthy and unhealthy behaviors we can make. And we can have a science of this. And this is what Aristotle thinks about the science of human behavior. But he says in book 1, chapter 3, or section 3, that you can only expect as much precision as the subject matter allows. So we're dealing with a very gray area here. Ethics is not black and white for Aristotle. The realm of human behavior is a very, very gray area. It's a mixed area. It's not absolute. It's not right or wrong, and this is always... There are some things, Aristotle would say, but most of the time it's a very gray area. However, that doesn't mean we throw up our hands and say, well, it's whatever anybody's opinion is. That is not the case. It's in between something like... Aristotle's position on ethics is in between something like absolutism, on the one hand. There is a clear-cut distinction. We can always know what right and wrong is, versus all the way on the other side, absolute relativism, when we just throw up our hands. He's saying ethics is a gray area. However, you can only expect as much precision as the subject matter allows. However, you can expect something, some kind of knowledge. Ethics yields some kind of knowledge, and that's what he's going to be pursuing here. Ethics is a kind of wisdom, or practical wisdom. And this is what the whole book is about. It's about learning practical wisdom. And this is what we're going to pick up in the next video on practical wisdom.